understand how other people are actually perceiving your work. Like, what do they think? What do they think about how you show up as a leader?
Badasses in Tech is brought to you by Growth Stack Media. If you're looking to scale your business affordably through public relations, video production, or podcasts, we've got you covered. Visit growthstackmedia.com to get in touch today. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Badasses in Tech. I'm your host, Summer Mitchell, and today I'm joined by Lena Reinhard. Lena has spent the last 14 years building and scaling high-performing engineering organizations. Throughout her career, she served as a co-founder, CEO, and vice president of engineering. Today, Lena is a coach, consultant, podcast host, and advisor for engineering leaders and organizations of all sizes. Welcome, Lena. We are so happy to have you today on Badasses in Tech. Did I forget anything?
I also worked as a car journalist for a while, which is actually something not a lot of people know, but it's okay to leave that out.
Fun fact. That is right. Exactly. We talked about that a lot as well when we worked together. And that's a great segue into, you started off in this very creative journalistic career, and you ended up going through a very engineering, still creative, leaning very much into the leadership aspect of things. What do you think got you started with this impressive career journey?
Well, thank you, first of all. Second of all, that's a really good question, because I realized at some point that I was really craving almost to make sense of my career. Because even before the car journalism, and I also worked at BuzzFeed for half a year in the 2015 Facebook and whatnot, everything's going wild and viral phase. I did, a lot of things to make ends meet. I also worked as a supermarket cashier for a while. But I initially started out in finance, but before that, as you accurately captured, I wanted to be in the creative field. I wanted to become a photographer. I had already interned with one and loved the field, really enjoyed the work. And my parents basically talked sense into me and said, well, do something stable, do something reliable for your future. And that's why I ended up working at a bank initially for 5 years, and also during the 2008 financial crash, ironically. But so much for stability. But I think, honestly, for a very long time, a big part of it was just making money and doing things that I was able to sell. And so after I had my first burnout at 22, when I left, and that's also one of the reasons why I left that career in finance. But for me, a big part was, I just have to survive. I have to pay my rent, get groceries. That's the one part. I think the other part is also that I've always been exceptionally curious and just interested in learning and, connecting with people, understanding what they're about, what they're trying to do, and figuring out how I can basically fit in and fill the gaps. Because, of course, I had the only sort of quote unquote official training I had for a very long time was as a bank clerk. Essentially, I'd done an apprenticeship in Germany. That was sort of my highest level of education qualification. And so I just very quickly learned to, adapt, fill gaps. My first, after the finance job I also worked as a baker. I'm actually just remembering my own job. But my first startup job was basically just that. They hired me as a writer, and I just for one project for redoing the copy on their website. And after those 2 weeks, they offered me a full-time contract. And that became my first of gap-filling role, where I initially started as a marketing and key account manager. I'm sure now, compared to everything I've seen you do, it was terrible. But we made it work. It was, 10 people startup. Everyone just had to jump in everywhere. That's how I got in touch with working with developers, started taking on the group management, worked with clients. It was a software as a service solution. And I think that's really what continued drawing me in, working with good people, with people who I can learn from in a field that I'm curious about. I worked a lot in developer tooling, which is about enabling people to do great work. And honestly, after now almost 20 years into my career, and I think it was 5 or so years ago that I actually sat down and looked at my CV and was like, what the hell am I even doing? Does any of this make sense? Because I'd never planned to, become a CEO at age 20 or be a co-founder or become a VP engineering. None of those things have mattered. It's just been obviously about finding the next thing that I'm really curious about. And in hindsight, of course, things started making sense, because that's where, now I can tell you, it's the curiosity, that's the connecting part, the learning, working with great people who I can learn from, including yourself. And basically then going onwards from there. And I think the other part is also that I'm a systems person, and that's how I ended up working with larger organizations over time. But so it's still honestly a little bit puzzling to me as well.
Well, I think you're touching on something that a lot of those in their career, a lot of job professionals, we are in a sense having to kind of just trust the process, and we might not be able to spend all of our time or as much time as we want to doing those things that we're passionate about. We may just have to make ends meet, especially now. So it's a beautiful thing to hear you really take this opportunity that you talked about, this, kind of contractual writing position, which I'm sure at the time, you were probably happy with it because it was creative, it was making ends meet, yet you were probably like, what am I supposed to do with this contract position? So can you talk a little bit about how you kind of flipped your mindset to be like, wow, I can really leverage this to help me get that next step that I want? Because I'm imagining there's a lot of people out there who are like, I'm just able to do contract work right now, but it's unfulfilling, or it feels maybe like it's not 100% tying back to my purpose.
Also, great question. I think it was a couple factors for me. One part was finding community. Like, I went to a lot of meetups at the time, and I started, taking over. Like, in one meetup, I started just co-organizing, helping them with the marketing. I started at that time also writing for a feminist blog and becoming an editor there, which was really impactful for me just in my personal journey in terms of, my beliefs, my identity, my values. That happened in parallel as well. I also started getting into open source work, and I started doing marketing work for some open source projects. Some of it also I was able to get paid for. Others I just did on the side. And in the end, basically met my then later co-founders through a lot of that work, through the community that I was able to become a part of. I did a little bit of, started some public speaking at meetups, mostly talked about how my first talk, I still remember, was titled, I think, Confessions of an Alien, being about being sort of a creative person and a person who does software engineering work in open source projects. And that talk got me, someone who was attending that meetup asked me if I wanted to speak at a conference. They were still looking, and I quote, for women speakers. And I was like, well, might as well. So that's where a lot of things came together, I think. And that basically, set a lot of things in motion. Like, for example, actually, I just realized the cup that I'm drinking is, I have some tea here. The cup that I'm drinking from is from CSSConf Australia in 2016, where again, I was able to go because of people I'd met, and they enjoyed the work that I was doing. So I think that was one part. But in terms of the whole sort of finding confidence and all that, I think that was a much longer journey, to be honest, and also one that I'm still on, where I found one part is just being more cognizant of the impact that I've been able to have, the good things I've been able to do. I also thrive on questioning myself a lot, but I also have tried or made a conscious effort over the last years to be much more cognizant of the positive things as well, which I think has helped. I think the other part is just getting older.
Well, that just is a relief. It's a relief that confidence and all that will come with age and come with wisdom. Because it's funny, I just turned 30 this year, or I guess last year.
Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, but it's funny how my mind has opened. I didn't mean to interrupt you, by the way, but I feel like my mind has opened, and I'm like, is it just me, or is it because I'm getting older? I don't care as much about, people's opinions, for example, as I once did. And what you're saying about the confidence being a learned thing, it sounds like, as we're all on this confidence journey, and age definitely does play a factor, it sounds like through all of these steps and all these experiences that you just described, you kind of raised your hand anyway and pushed yourself to do it and saw the benefits, saw the connections.
And also at the same time, I had people who believed in me, who, thought I could do things that I'd never done, or who thought that what I had to offer was valuable. For me, especially having been in the tech industry for such a long time now, I've often basically been able to complement highly specialized technical teams. Like, for example, my co-founders were 4 software engineers, all highly specialized, specifically like offline first solutions that are designed to, work wherever, whenever. They asked me to be their co-founder because I had the business background from my work in finance, and that's where it suddenly became useful. But yeah, a big part was also just figuring it out on the go. And oftentimes, honestly, not feeling confident at all, but just having to, the whole like fake it till you make it. I think there is a lot to it. I also will say for a long time, I was just over prepared for everything I did whenever I could. For example, like I started public speaking 9 years ago. Initially, my talks were written out verbatim. And I got very, very, like no one believes that when they watch those talks from back then. Because I got very good at, I essentially not reading, obviously, but really following the script because my English was not as good. I'm not a native speaker. I wanted to be precise in what I was saying. And so that also helped because at some point I was able to, just move to bullet points. At this point, it's much freer. But basically building crutches for myself been a really important part of it.
Lena, what you just mentioned about being over prepared, I think that is so important. And it doesn't get talked about, in my opinion, enough about it, especially when we're building a new skill and learning and trying a new thing. And I think as I'm hearing you recount your experience, it's all about, like we talked about, being curious, being willing to try new things, and being prepared. And that's something I talk a lot about on this podcast. A lot of my peers and a lot of the listeners that tune in, they'll say, I can't figure out how I'm stuck. I'm feeling stuck. I can't figure out how to identify those moments of growth or how to really articulate the impact that I'm bringing to my team. So can you talk a little bit about that, being prepared? It might seem like a small thing, but really it speaks volumes for leaders, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that question, and I'll briefly go into big context and then I'll loop it back, because honestly, all of those things, are things that I'm realizing now 20 years almost into my career. And that in itself is something I just want to pull out, because for me, like being able to articulate that now is the result of a lot of like bumbling and fumbling my way through. And that I think is important, because that insecurity that a lot of people sort of aspiring or, actual leaders like may be feeling, like that can be part of the process. I've spent most of my career working with hyper-confident white men because I've worked in the tech space, and for all of them, all of those things seem to come, so naturally. And it was just so simple and so easy. And they're just different personality types, and that's absolutely okay. But for me, it's also meant I've realized at some point, for example, so I ran a workshop on becoming a change leader. And when I open that workshop, I always tell people, like, I'm German and I consider myself stereotypically German in only 2 ways. The one is that I love structure and I hate change. And that is that I really love potatoes. And so for me, at some point, I realized the things that I've had to learn in order to become a leader, like, for example, handling ambiguity, that gave me so much anxiety. I've also been taking therapy, that's in terms of concrete takeaways. That's also been really important. I've also had coaches myself that supported me through this. But so I've dealt with a lot of, for example, anxiety around change, but that also meant I started finding frameworks to handle change and difficulty. I looked for tools that can help me manage those things. And it meant, having to basically lead in a different way than people to whom that sort of bold, confident, ambiguity is my jam kind of thing to come more easily. And on the flip side, that now also means I'm able to pass on those kinds of tools to others, because I've had to learn it and it didn't just, it's not just natural to who I am as a person. And in that process, though, was also, in terms of one part is becoming the leader that I want to be. The second part is also becoming the person I want to be, because I do believe that those things are really inextricably intertwined. And I feel like I didn't fully come around to answering your question.
No, that you did. I mean, I think what you're describing is, if you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be this highly confident, living and breathing, just, just confidence and ego. Right.
Yeah.
And something that you're touching on is, first step is really knowing what are your strengths, what makes you anxious, and being able to listen to your body and understand, okay, if this piece is making me anxious, then I must need more support in this area.
Yeah.
Whether it's calling in an expert, calling in a mentor, making sure that if you're working on a specific thing, you always have a person that has a skill set that you do not have. So I think you're touching on, a lot of the good kind of reminders for those out there who really want to kind of be perceived as a leader in their professional life. And like you're saying, also just a person to work with, a person who can effectively lead calmly and make an impact in all of the areas of their life.
Yeah. And I think that piece around the perception of work, I think, is something that's really important, because one aspect is essentially, how do you want to lead? What do you value? But the other part is also what is valued and rewarded in the corporate world. And in many, if not to say most organizations, that, very bold, brazen, just get out there and get the stuff done, and no matter the cost. That kind of leadership style is still quite prevalent. I do think we're also seeing a bit of a shift with, generational changes, more millennials being in leadership roles and all that. But that also means, understand how other people are actually perceiving your work. What do they think? What do they think about how you show up as a leader? Try and get some feedback. If you're not getting feedback, ask them questions that sort of help them get there. For example, what advice do you have for me? Or ask them, what do you think we should be doing better? Framing things around us in the first person plural often really helps. So get to feedback that people don't want to give you.
Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you haven't already, why don't you take a second to click follow or subscribe on the platform you're tuning into so that you won't miss a second of Badasses in Tech. Also, if you're really loving what you're hearing today, why don't you drop us a 5-star review or leave us a positive comment, as it really helps the podcast grow and helps us continue doing what we're doing, which is helping people become a badass.
I have a whole article that we can probably put in the show notes around understanding and managing perception, because I've also honestly found that those two things are often separate. It's actually a tip something that I learned from a coach, Laura Gates, she's fantastic, and that I've applied with other clients as well, is basically developing and then moving into, what are they called? Personas. Because I had gotten feedback that I should be more confident, which is also is not helpful feedback.
I was just going to say,
yeah.
What does that even mean?
Yes, exactly. And it's a very gendered thing. Anyway, but I'd gotten that feedback. I was, in an executive position. You've got to just do what you've got to do. There's the arguing that if you want to keep your job. But I was also this feels like essentially coded language for people telling me to just, I was working exclusively with white men around me, and it felt like they were essentially just telling me to behave more like them. And so with my coach at the time, we designed an experiment where essentially, I called him Chad. So Chad was this sort of very confident, would just throw opinions out there, doesn't care what other people think, kind of personified, sort of, described him a little bit. I had a mental image of what he looked like. And then in specific meetings with the people who had gotten that feedback from, I would bring Chad out. And sort of experimented on that over time, asked for feedback again. But so, yeah, I would sit in these meetings and, unlike I would usually do, where I'm more facilitator, I'm not going to, just interrupt someone and cut in, because I think it's impolite and not helpful. I would just, be very, I would throw much more opinions out, not necessarily think everything through, be much more sort of experimental. That was really helpful, because I suddenly realized that I can play around with how I show up. I don't have to just always, quote unquote, be myself. I also firmly don't believe that we can always be fully ourselves in the workplace, because it's capitalism, it's corporation. You all have to make money. It's a power dynamic. So yeah, that's just bring your whole self to work, I think, is bullshit. I debate that, but yeah.
Well, we talked a little bit about that before recording. There is a little bit of fear of, if I bring my whole self, or if I show all parts of me, how is that going to be perceived? Is it going to impact my trajectory? Is it going to impact the projects that I get put on, or the people that I get to work with? So yeah, there is very much a real fear. So creating the perceptions, taking the inventory of, I think that's one thing that a lot of us, we're just so quick to get the thing done, send it out, on to the next. We skip over the fundamental pieces that will help us feel better about our day, whether we're loving what we're doing or not. And it's, how is this making me feel? How am I, when I'm speaking, and I'm sure you can speak to this as a speaker, as a coach, like if I'm speaking, what are other people doing? Are their eyes lighting up? Even if it's a remote setting, are they looking away? Taking yourself out of yourself for a minute and scanning the room. Also, you mentioned the feedback, which I think a lot of us either don't know how to appropriately ask for feedback, or again, are afraid to hear something that they're not going to like. So I think it's important what we're talking about, the taking a minute to reflect and get that extra data, get that extra insight that you need to wake up tomorrow and maybe to try one new thing different, or, and take one more thing. So
that is a really important point. Like I mentioned, the whole personas thing, which is always a bit more elaborate. But one thing that I do a ton now with my clients, and that honestly I wish I'd done sooner in my career, is just experiment. Try things differently, show up differently, write shorter emails, write longer emails, do different kind of reporting to your boss. Essentially just, throw things out there. It doesn't have to be someone, like you mentioned earlier, used to take everything very personally and very too hard. And it just gave me a really hard time. And I realized that we are treating things as experiments, treating how you write an email, how you run a project, treating that like an experiment, and then, seeing, hey, how did that go? How did I feel about it? But the whole idea is basically to, in any situation you're in, it can be helpful to separate out where are the areas where you can actually, you're sort of cornered, there's no way out. These kinds of mental models that help you to step back in the way that you described are really helpful. Plus also that ability to take yourself out of a situation, look at it holistically, that's a hugely important leadership skill. Because that's, that takes us to systems thinking, to looking at situations much more holistically. And especially if you were, in higher level roles, that skill is crucial. So, double benefit.
I love that. And what you're saying too, I never thought about it in the structure of an experiment. You have your thesis, or honestly, I'm showing I haven't spent much time in science, but I do remember the science class. What's your hypothesis? Exactly. My hypothesis is the way I'm speaking right now, or the way I'm being perceived, isn't making the impact that I want. That's the hypothesis. And then, you could tell me how exactly you went through that experiment as Chad. But, then it's okay, here's the steps. Here's what we're going to try. And the beautiful thing about an experiment is we'll give it 2 weeks. Then let's measure. Let's see. So I love that kind of call to, don't be afraid to experiment with changes. You don't have to make a change and that be now the new law.
It's forever.
Yeah. So I love that.
Yeah, and I really want to encourage playfulness, because a lot of things that, a lot of the struggles that we all have at work, they're usually, they're big things, they're anxiety inducing. One tool, by the way, that I've also found really useful is the biceps model of human core needs. Even if just as a self-reflection, it's so helpful to understand, what are essentially the things that trigger me, that make me, for example, anxious, or that are really hard to navigate for me. But yeah, a lot of those problems at work can be really tough. And so bringing some, small changes, playfulness, realizing that, yes, you are actually in a position to sort of take ownership of how you do things. You're not, sure, at some point it becomes harder to change yourself as a person. So back to the aging aspect, but at the same time, we're all, we can change how we show up. And it doesn't all have to be about you. Like you can basically expand your toolkit as, a leader, as a person in the workplace, and do things differently. That's really the big thing. And play around with it. Try to make some things happen for yourself that are a bit lighter and a bit less serious. Like I'm at this point in my career, I'm basically just moving towards unhinged. I had a conversation last week. I was running a workshop for senior engineering leaders like CTOs, VPs, and the workshop had a playlist that comes with it. And every section of the workshop had a different like lyrical and song to it.
Oh, I love that.
It's where I'm at now. And I think doing more of those things, find things that you enjoy where you can just do things that are maybe silly that other people might hate. Like I'm not sure everyone loves my 80s to the latest Barbie movie top song. But I'm okay with that because
it makes you happy.
Exactly.
And I think too, what you're talking about, it helps instill confidence. Setting something quote unquote small and achieving that quote unquote small thing. Well, oh, look at you. Now you can go and tackle something a little bit bigger. Even if that thing that you tackled was creating a fun playlist that made you excited to facilitate the best workshop that you facilitated. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, I've also, and that's another thing I wish I'd realized and done sooner, like it helps you find your people. Like, because putting those things out there, it doesn't have to be, you're running a 200 people workshop and you're doing the silly playlist thing. And there's probably half of the room who are like, what the hell is this woman doing on stage? But it doesn't, you don't have to start there. I didn't start there either. But sort of showing, those parts of yourself in small ways or running these experiments, can be really great. Like I had someone actually in the follow-up to this playlist thing. I met with a fellow engineering leader. I ended up being 10 minutes late. I started the Zoom meeting on my phone, still racing up. I live on the 5th floor, no elevator. I was out of gosh. But what they ended up telling me is, hey, we ended up transitioning to the setup I have here, kind of professional things set here. But they told me, hey, Lena, it's really refreshing to see that there's someone else out there who is, just barely holding it together right now and just scrambling to get things done and to show up as a professional. And again,
absolutely,
you don't have to start there, but sort of exposing those little parts of yourself and so finding out where you can then, find your people can be really beautiful as well as part of this.
That's such a great point. And it doesn't have to be perfect every single time. It's going to get messy. Being a leader or finding success, finding that career that you're excited to get up every single morning, it's not going to be, first of all, I'm sure it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. It's definitely not going to be just this beautiful straight line going up to the right of just beautiful, clean success. Though I think that's important. Yeah.
And
what would you say, you're talking a lot about, I've heard you maybe 2 or 3 times already say this is what I wish I knew about. Or do you have any other fun, secret little pieces of advice that you wish that you knew starting out?
I think one more is to figure out what you can do to pursue what you want. So basically find ways to own your career. And that's the workshop that I gave last week was about, owning your career design, making it real. The title was obviously You Can Go Your Own Way, Fleetwood Mac, which was also playlist coming full.
So fitting. Yes. And
because the reality is, and we've touched on this a couple times, that we can't all do everything that we want at all times. There's, we all have to make money. There's still a lot of people of color or underrepresented groups in our industry are still experiencing a lot of discrimination. I also regularly, meet coach parents who are, especially mothers who are trying to return to the workplace after parenting or after giving birth and parental leave for a little while. All of those constraints, for example, are still real. It's not sort of choose your own adventure at all times, but at the same time, what I wish I had realized sooner is that I can take ownership of what I want to do. There may be periods where you just have to optimize for, making money, having a stable income, having healthcare. And there may be other times where you can get more creative, put yourself out there, try things out. It took me, I had my own business for a while. Of course, I also was a co-founder, but like it took me quite a while to get to a point where I felt like I was at a place in my life where I could actually launch my own business, try and do this full time. And that sort of charging your own path in a messy, complex world, it's just not something that everyone is sort of wired for. And I know a lot of people who are. I have the great pleasure of working with a client who has personal OKRs every quarter and a 10-year vision for their life, which is phenomenal.
I need to meet them.
Oh, yeah. It's just...
I could learn a lot.
But yeah, figure out, what are the constraints and figure out, find your community, do the things that you want to do as much as possible.
Yeah. You're definitely a living, breathing example of that. Just thinking about what we talked about, again, I keep going back to your experiences, but I just see this pattern of the curiosity, raising your hand to be involved in the things that drive you, finding the community, and also, putting a dash of your own personality or putting your own spin or having some fun with it along the way. That kind of helps you, kind of is the glue that keeps all of those other parts together. And I love too, you mentioned you're a speaker and you've done a lot of workshops. My favorite part about working with you was how, you would talk about a very not technical, but, managerial concept. But you would start off with, here's one thing I have to say about birds. And, you would have this really great... Yeah. Or, like you said, there's two things about me. One is, I can't remember what you said. And two is I love potatoes. And it's those types of things that stick with whoever you're speaking to, make you a little bit more memorable, and probably help to allow that path of conversation. Hey, I don't really know what to say to you, but boy, I love that bird's thing. Or, you like potatoes? I like potatoes. So you're giving those around you like a little, I'm drawing a blank.
It's fast. Yeah. Or like an invitation, almost an invitation, like an invitation to connect with, like a little link. I love that you brought up the bird because it also, it made me remember that I've incorporated poetry into tech conference talks because I love poetry a lot and it's important in my life. My most sort of successful talk in terms of views, it's called A Talk About Nothing, and it incorporates the concept of nothingness in math and physics, and then goes into, essentially it's a talk about privilege and how a lot of things that are, nothing to some of us are actually like big issues. And it then talks a lot about like ethics and software development and how basically we need to do better in representing our users because software is an act of representation, but so all of those things, especially honestly, the public speaking was a huge vehicle for that. And I always loved that, you would encourage me to sort of bring those things. But I did those things also to have fun with it because honestly, like public speaking, it's a lot of work. I think I've gotten paid for maybe 8% of the talks I've given. And the pay is not a monthly wage, like by far not. So I very quickly realized, obviously, I wanted to do this because I had important things that I wanted to say. I wanted to speak up about, the state of the industry, for example, that we're all in. But I also wanted to do it in a way that I was still learning more things from and that just gave me joy. And I spend way too much time on these talks. That's the downside of it.
On top of always just your normal work.
But yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And then the bird lady, there's actually, I got an email a couple of weeks ago from someone who messaged me about that talk and just said, hey, the bird really, they remembered that story and they loved it. And also like the rest of the talk, but really the bird.
Exactly. It's like, what can you do to make maybe if, you're listening and you're feeling a little stuck, or maybe you're feeling kind of bored, or maybe you're feeling super stressed out, or you're maybe in the middle of your career and in between jobs right now, like trying to make the process, trying to do what you're doing, make it as fun as you can for yourself.
Yeah. And also, honestly, look beyond, look outside. Like I used to be that big pride thing for me. Like I used to be for many years in the Pocket. It's sort of read later. I used to be in the top 1% of Pocket users because I would just, read a lot of essays, especially also fiction, like read fiction. Don't just read, business books. Because I think, of course, we're talking about, being sort of, badass in tech and so being in this industry and building a career. But building a career is just one part of building a good life for yourself, or building a life that's as good as possible. And like us sort of talking about this, here we are, or at least I am in the fortunate position that I can sort of make choices about how I build my life now, which wasn't always the case. And so I do feel like there is also this broader thing that I would just want to share around, look outside, like touch some go to, like, see some art. Like, I love art. I paint. I still do creative things. Maybe creativity is not your stuff, but then go to a science museum. But like, I think the building your career part is so important. But at the same time, I do think the things that you do outside of it can also play a huge role in either, making your sucky job more manageable, or giving you new ideas that sort of help you inspire the people who you're connecting with, or like making you more confident because you realize, hey, I suck at my job right now, but I did this really great painting on the weekend, so I still got it. So yeah, look outside.
Yeah, find what fills you. Find what fills your cup up when, work is work. It's not going to be roses and sunshines every single day, but find the ways, or create the ways rather, is what we're kind of talking about, is like create those ways that you can make it enjoyable for yourself. Your career is one piece, but it doesn't define who you are as a person, as an individual. It's one piece. You might have a bad day at work, but try to find that way to go outside and be grateful for, oh, look at this beautiful butterfly outside. Yeah. I love when I see butterflies. It really just puts me right back to where I need to be. And then what I'm working on, or what I was stressed out about in the office, or, from a work perspective, it doesn't seem to matter as much as it did before I took my butterfly walk.
Yeah. Oh, butterfly walk. I love that. Well, it puts things into perspective. I mean, last week I mentioned, I had this really big week. I was also jet lagged because it was on the West Coast. But I went out of the city. I was staying in Oakland, went for a hike with a couple of friends. I will openly admit that I did hug a sequoia tree.
And you did.
I also did bring a little bark that is not sitting just right there on my windowsill.
I love that.
It's obviously on the ground already. But yeah, like get some perspective. And then after that, I had another 10 hours of work and networking events and whatnot. But I had also already hugged a tree that day, so can't get that bad.
That's what kept you going.
Yeah, that tree and that playlist.
Can't forget the playlist. We may need to put the playlist in the show notes.
I'm very happy to share it. Designed to help with career design exercises that I made, but I think you also listen to it while cleaning my house. So I think it.
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. Find things that can benefit both your career and your personal life. So let's start with playlists. I love it.
It's been so lovely to see you, and thank you so much for that lovely conversation and for the exploration. And I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I have one last question. Maybe actually I have two last questions. We're talking a lot about people who are kind of in this transitional phase of their careers, or they're trying to start something new. What piece of advice, I know you gave a lot of advice, related to leadership, related to finding career growth opportunities, weaving your passions into your day-to-day. What's one kind of final piece of advice that you have for those out there who may be looking for something new, or maybe kind of needing a inspirational push forward?
So if you're looking for something new, challenging right now, I think we all know that 2022 and 2023 have been tough years. I would say, have a good CV, really, get your basics right. I also would recommend have patience if you can. Obviously, that's a question of do you have the financial means to hold out a little bit? It might also be worth considering honestly taking a step back, moving into a lower level role again. At the moment, for example, middle management positions are a bit harder to find. Some folks are moving back just into line management because for those roles, there's just still more hiring going on. Personally, I do think we might still keep seeing this for a little while, but it's not sustainable for the organizations that have just removed that layer of management. And again, try and, create some good things, because especially job search can really knock your confidence down, and it does that to everyone. That's also worth mentioning. I don't know, hyper confident people who just got, who are dealing with similar challenges, because it's just rough, and companies are honestly being not great about their hiring processes right now. Long waiting times. You may have to have a lot of patience to get through processes. So that's the one thing basically that I would just want to put out there. You're not alone in this. A lot of people are struggling with this right now. Again, try and find communities find other good things in your life where you can, that are just good for you, that make you feel good, and that then they probably also help with confidence a little bit.
So good. And yeah, it is reassuring, because a lot of us out there are like, what's going on? What am I doing the right thing? So It's a breath of fresh air to hear what you have to say. And Lena, where can our listeners find you if they're wanting to check out some of your workshops or check out your playlists or some of your resources? Where can our listeners check you out?
I think I'll have to now just start a separate section on my website of playlists. I think that's my follow-up action item for the conversation. So I have a website at lenareinhard.com, so just my name, and I have a lot of articles and resources on there, templates you can download, and cheat sheets for example, strategic leadership, or for helping your team become more efficient. See, the currently really big theme. I have a whole process that you can follow to basically, create the perception and do the work that your bosses expect from you. And at the same time, do that in a way that's respectful of the people you're working with, which is, one of my core values. So at the website, I'm still figuring out everything else. I have a TikTok account that I've never actually publicly mentioned, but apparently this happened right now. So I'm still launching my TikTok account that's been just sort of in stealth mode.
Here we go.
It's another
going to start getting some followers now.
I have a few already, but that's mostly because I've been such an active TikTok consumer for a while. And that's another thing that, technically I'm probably too old for and whatnot, but I'm just playing around with it and it's a lot of fun. So I have a TikTok account. I have Blue Sky technically, but who knows what happens. I used to have Twitter. It's technically,
right,
but I don't use it. So yeah. But yeah, look at my website. I have a newsletter that comes out whenever I have the capacity. So I haven't sent one in 4 months, and that's okay. But yeah,
that is okay.
And reach out on the internet I have a lot of talks and resources on my website on various, topics on basically leading, managing change, dealing with chaos, and just, being a person in the workplace and being a badass in tech. So
there you go. What a wealth of knowledge and information and tips. I'm so happy that we brought you on. I'm so happy that you wanted to take some time out of your day to chat with us. And now all of our listeners, they'll have no choice but to go and check out all of the great things that you have so they can be a badass like you. That's what we're aspiring for.
Thank you so much. It's been so heartwarming.
Badasses in Tech is brought to you by Growth Stack Media. If you're looking to scale your business affordably through public relations, video production, or podcasts, we've got you covered. Visit growthstackmedia.com to get in touch today.